This is Jeff Bezos, and this is Kim Jong-un. One is a capitalist and the other a communist. But these two actually have a surprisingly lot in common. In fact, they have almost everything in common. Both are unelected dictators of multi-billion-dollar entities. They're both extraordinarily rich and wealthy, while people who work under them are all equally poor. There's no private ownership of anything for the average citizen or employee. Hell, both of them even control what you can and can't say. You have no free speech when you're a part of their entity. And they both even control what you wear and impose serious, life-threatening punishments on anyone who dares speak out against them. If you speak out against Kim Jong-un, you get sent to a North Korean labor camp for life. If you speak out against Jeff Bezos, you lose your job, your ability to eat and pay rent, and eventually you go homeless and starve to death. 15 years ago, I was a young and edgy teenager looking for my first job out of high school. This was long before society had all the anti-capitalist, anti-work sentiments you see today. I was applying for jobs online when one of my teachers told me that I had to take down one of my Facebook pictures where I was partying with a friend, because if a company saw this, they might not want to hire me. The culture was different back then, so I couldn't say this out loud, but I immediately realized there was something deeply sinister and communist about this. Who the fuck is an unelected corporate boss to tell me what I can or can't do, say or wear when I'm not even on company time? I can understand if they want me to dress and behave a certain way when I'm on the job, but if I can't even say or do what I want outside of work, how is this any different than living under communism? How is this any different from living under an authoritarian dictator? Well, it really isn't any different when you think about it, is it? At the time, I felt really alone as, again, this was long before Gen Z and anti-work came of age. And this is why I'm so grateful to Gen Z for being the first generation with the balls to stand up to this corporate communism and say, no, this is bullshit. I've made it my personal mission on this channel to get out the word and expose these corporations as the authoritarian communist dictatorships they are. And ironically, when I do this, I'm the one who gets called communist over and over. It's incredible just how defensive people get when you tell them that they're entitled to better wages and living conditions. They're so quick to defend the very corporate communist dictators who exploit them. It's probably the strangest case of Stockholm Syndrome I've ever seen. For those of you who don't know, Stockholm Syndrome is a strange phenomenon where hostages develop a strange emotional bond with their kidnappers. And listen, if you are one of those people who called me communist, I'm not here to attack you or destroy you or try and win any argument. I'm just pointing this out for you to think about. I actually think we all ultimately want the same thing. We want to find meaning and purpose in our lives beyond work. We're tired of our whole existence being reduced to nothing more than dollar signs on a spreadsheet. We just have different philosophies as to how to get there, which is fine. It's important to have a productive dialogue on both sides of any issue. So the first thing I'm sure people, especially capitalist apologists, are going to point out is that technically, you can quit your job. The problem is, this is only true in theory, but not in the real world. The way society is set up, you can't really live without money, which is what you depend on your job for. This means that if you quit, you eventually go homeless and starve to death. So the whole idea of freedom under capitalism is just one big illusion, isn't it? The next time you walk into a McDonald's or an Amazon warehouse, pay attention to a few things. Isn't everything there wearing the same exact uniform? Isn't everyone there pretending to be happy, while they dare not ever speak out against or criticize their boss? Isn't everyone being paid the same dogshit $7 an hour? Isn't everyone there equally poor under capitalism, the same way they tell us everyone will be equally poor under communism? And just like under communism, you'll be thrown into a labor camp if you criticize the leader. Under capitalism, you'll lose your job and go homeless and starve if you criticize your boss. According to Anti-Slavery International, modern slavery is when an individual is exploited by others for personal or commercial gain. Whether tricked, coerced, or forced, they lose their freedom. It's important these terms are clearly defined, otherwise people get all sensitive and offended about it. Obviously, we don't want to diminish or disrespect the brutality of historical slavery. But at the same time, it's also important to be historically accurate. When we think of slavery in the West, the first thing that comes to mind is the slavery of Black Americans in the 1800s. But slavery has a way longer history than that, and not all slaves were treated equally. For example, there were some slaves of the nobility in the ancient Roman Empire who were actually fed, clothed, and treated relatively well. My point here is that just because you're not literally being tied down and shackled with a ball and chain doesn't mean you're not a slave. The definition of slavery is simply when you are being forced to work and have no ability to quit. The coercion method is the only thing that's changed. Instead of brutally beating you to death, they just slowly starve you to death today. It's definitely a more humane form of coercion, but it's still coercion at the end of the day. A common response I get to this is, well, even before society existed, humans had to work to hunt and gather for food. They're basically making the case that the human condition itself is slavery, according to my logic. Again, this is where actual historical research and facts matter. According to all the anthropologic data available, early cavemen hunter-gatherer tribes only worked about 20 hours a week. Not only this, but they dictated with their own free will when and where they wanted to work. If, for example, they caught a big piece of game that could last them 3 days, they could literally just rest the next 3 days. They weren't forced to work a set amount of hours every day. There was a certain amount of work, if you want to call it that needed to be done, and once the job was finished, you could call it a day and rest. The rewards from your work were directly tied to your productivity, something modern Gen Z workers would die for today. Probably the biggest frustration I hear from young people about modern work isn't so much about work itself, but the fact that no matter how hard they work, it doesn't pay off. I'm sure if work was set up in a way where there was just a set amount of work to do, and as soon as you finished, you could go home, people would be a lot more productive and engaged. The fact that you're trapped there 8 hours a day, no matter how much work you get done, is why today's system is fundamentally just a modern form of slavery. Yes, conditions may be better. Yes, the method of coercion is more humane. But this is just proving it's a less severe form of slavery. The underlying system is ultimately the same. China might be a superior form of communism compared to North Korea, and American corporations might be a better superior form of communism compared to China. But they're ultimately just different degrees of the same fundamental system.
No food, no power, brutal police, corrupt officials, electioneering, controlled media, crackdown on protests, no meaningful opposition, and no private property for the working class. Literally, everything they warned us would happen under communism is happening under capitalism.
If you take away nothing else from this video, remember this. Communism, socialism, capitalism, they're all just words. They're all just words used to scare you into accepting their horrible wages and working conditions. You're against exploitation of workers? Well, you're a communist. You want to actually enjoy stuff in life besides work? Well, you're a communist. It's no different how the left calls anyone who disagrees with them a racist. I would encourage you to look beyond words and labels and look at the actual results of things that are happening around you every day as we speak. And if you're able to do that, you'll see that, as R.D. Hale said, everything they warned us would happen under communism is happening under capitalism. They're ultimately just two sides of the same coin.